Sally Field was not only the lead in her first professional on-camera.
At 78, Sally Field isn't interested in sugarcoating her story. She's been the wide-eyed ingenue, the brilliant actress, and the woman who fought for roles worth her talent. And she's also been through love, heartbreak, and the kind of soul-searching that changes you forever. After 2 marriages, countless rumors, and decades of dodging the question, she's finally ready to explain why she never walked down the aisle again. And her answer? It's as unfiltered, fiercely honest, and unmistakably Sally as you'd expect. From California to the big stage, long before the heartbreaks, the bitter divorces, and the quiet decision to give up on men entirely, Sally Field was just a little girl with a storybook dream. She imagined the day she would meet her Prince Charming, and together they would live happily ever after. Born on November 6, 1946, in Pasadena, California, Sally was the daughter of actress Margaret Field and pharmacist Richard Dryden Field, a World War II Army veteran. Her older brother, Richard Dryden Field Jr., would go on to become a physicist and academic. When Sally was just 4, her parents divorced, and her mother married again, this time to actor and stuntman Jock Mahoney in Tijuana, Mexico, in 1952. Her roots stretched across England, Ireland, and through her father's side to Sicily, Italy. But behind the Hollywood stepfather and glamorous lineage was a darker truth. Sally revealed in her 2018 memoir that Mahoney abused her during her childhood. As a teenager, she was the sunny, smiling cheerleader at Portola Middle School and later Birmingham High School in Van Nuys. Her classmates included future financier Michael Milken and talent agent Michael Ovitz, while actress Cindy Williams trailed her by a year. Yet behind the pom-poms and the big California smile, life had already dealt her blows. At 17, she endured an illegal abortion in Mexico, a traumatic experience made worse when she was molested during the procedure. By 1965, television came calling. She made her debut as the boy-crazy surfer girl in the sitcom Gidget, a show that flopped at first but became a surprise hit in summer reruns. Wanting to capitalize on her fresh-faced charm, ABC quickly cast her in The Flying Nun as Sister Bertrille. The series ran for 3 seasons, but Sally later admitted she hated every minute of it. Directors didn't treat her with respect, and she was trapped in a role that cemented her as Hollywood's girl next door, a label she couldn't seem to shake. Her big-screen debut had actually come earlier, as an extra in the 1962 film Moon Pilot. She followed Gidget and The Flying Nun with her first starring film role in The Way West, but the kind of parts she craved were still out of reach. Determined to push past the typecasting, she took on roles in projects like the 1971 TV movie Maybe I'll Come Home in the Spring, where she played a runaway teen who returns home with a drug-using hippie boyfriend, and made guest appearances on popular shows like Alias Smith and Jones and Night Gallery. In 1973, she landed The Girl with Something Extra, starring opposite John Davidson. The series only lasted a year, but it marked a turning point when Sally decided she needed to truly learn her craft. She began studying at the Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg, who became a mentor and helped her dismantle the cute sitcom star image. Around the same time, she divorced her first husband in 1975. Then came the role that changed everything, Sybil. Playing a young woman with dissociative identity disorder in the NBC television film allowed Sally to tap into depths she had never been given the chance to show before. Her performance earned her an Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in 1977 and shattered any lingering doubts about her dramatic range. From there, her career lit up. She delivered powerhouse performances in films like Stay Hungry, Smokey and the Bandit, Heroes, The End, and Hooper. Then, in 1979, she stunned critics and audiences alike as the labor organizer in Norma Rae, winning her first Academy Award for Best Actress. 5 years later, she took home her second Oscar for Places in the Heart. The 80s cemented her as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, with memorable roles in Smokey and the Bandit 2, Absence of Malice, Kiss Me Goodbye, Murphy's Romance, and Steel Magnolias. The 90s brought more hits, Soap Dish, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Forrest Gump, each one proving she could swing effortlessly between drama and comedy. Sally also made space for theater. She debuted on Broadway in 2002 in Edward Albee's The Goat, or Who is Sylvia?, replacing Mercedes Ruehl. 15 years later, she returned in a revival of The Glass Menagerie, earning a Tony Award nomination. In 2019, she made her West End debut in All My Sons. Even in her later years, she never stopped exploring. She charmed audiences in Hello, My Name is Doris, took on a quirky role in the Netflix series Maniac, and most recently shared the screen in 80 for Brady. It's been decades since the little girl in Pasadena dreamed of happily ever after, and Sally Field has lived through more than her share of triumphs and tragedies. But through every role, whether as a nun who could fly, a mother who'd do anything for her children, or a woman who refuses to be underestimated, she's carried the same quiet truth. She is, and always has been, more than the stories written for her. Sally Field's not-so-fairy-tale relationships. Sally Field has been America's sweetheart since she burst onto the screen in the mid-1960s as a bright-eyed teenage actress. Over the decades, she's lived the kind of life Hollywood dreams are made of. International fame, awards, and the luxury of picking from a long line of leading men who wanted her on their arm. But behind the charming smile and the rom-com sparkle, Field's personal life carried a different script. She grew up in an abusive household, and that experience shaped how she viewed lovemaking and intimacy, making them both magnetic and complicated. In a 2008 interview with O, the Oprah magazine, she explained that she had always been drawn to men she both feared and loved. Her stepfather, she recalled, was cruel yet affectionate, which made the relationship a mess of contradictions. She described her mother as loving, though both her parents were passive and emotionally restrained, while her stepfather created an environment where her survival depended on anger. That early cocktail of affection and fear bled into her romantic life for years. These days, Field is in a better place. Happily single, she looks back on her relationships with clarity and often with a wry smile. Fans, though, are still obsessed with the men she's been linked to over the years. After all, when you've dated some of the most recognizable names in Hollywood, the stories tend to stick. Her romantic history reads like a snapshot of late 1960s and early 1970s pop culture. As her career took off, Field found herself in the orbit of other rising stars. One of her early links was with Lee Majors, then an up-and-coming actor himself. By 1972, TV Picture Life magazine was reporting that she and Majors had been involved sometime between his romance with the Big Valley co-star Linda Evans and his relationship with Marianne Mobley. Majors later immortalized his Hollywood escapades in song, with his 1981 single, Unknown Stuntman, serving as the theme for The Fall Guy. In the lyrics, he claimed he wasn't the kind to kiss and tell, but admitted he had been on fire with Sally Field and had never been with anything less than a 9, so fine. Considering Majors went on to marry Farrah Fawcett in 1973, it's hard not to think there was some truth buried in the boast. But before Majors, there was Pete Dool. Field had just landed her breakout TV role in 1965, playing the bubbly teenage surfer in Gidget. Dool played her character's brother-in-law, and after the series ended in 1966, they began spending time together. In a 1967 interview with Movieland and TV Time, Field downplayed the rumors that the two were headed for something serious. She pointed out that in Hollywood, if you went out with someone more than 5 times, the press practically married you off. With Dool, she insisted, it was nothing more than enjoying each other's company, rare enough in itself to be worth protecting. The story took a dark turn in 1971, when Dool was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Decades later, Field reflected on him with raw emotion, confessing that she had loved him deeply and that part of her was angry he was no longer alive. She remembered his talent and the way he often treated her more like a sister than a girlfriend, something that had frustrated her at the time. By the late 60s, Field's career was shifting gears again. She had secured the lead in The Flying Nun, and her new success coincided with a brief romance with Davy Jones of the Monkees, who were then at the peak of their fame. Monkey Spectacular magazine in February 1968 ran a piece on their relationship, clarifying that it wasn't exclusive, but was marked by shared humor and easy camaraderie. Field remembered first meeting Jones when he crowned the winner of the Miss Teen International pageant. Their first conversation was short, but when they ran into each other again at the studio, she thought he was so neat. What sealed the connection was realizing they shared the same sense of humor. They laughed and goofed around constantly. Yet her time around the Monkees wasn't entirely lighthearted. In her memoir, In Pieces, Field described how members of the band made innuendos toward her on the set of The Flying Nun. She also recounted a disturbing incident where the group cornered her in her trailer until an assistant stepped in to help. Around the same period, Field became involved with singer-songwriter Jimmy Webb. She was still playing Sister Bertrill when they started dating, and their time together would later become one of the most controversial parts of her memoir. She described an incident where, after the two had smoked a joint, she awoke to find Webb on top of her, grinding away to another melody. Field clarified that she didn't believe he had malicious intent, attributing his behavior to being under the influence. Webb, for his part, addressed the account in a 2018 email to the New York Times, framing their time together as typical of two 22-year-olds in the swingin' 1960s, full of parties, pot, and essa. He claimed to have great respect for her and admitted he left her out of his own memoir to avoid tarnishing her wholesome image. As her professional star rose, Field's personal life took a more traditional turn when she married her high school sweetheart Stephen Craig in 1968. Craig, a construction contractor, wasn't part of the Hollywood machine, but he accompanied her to premieres and events. While working on The Flying Nun, Field became pregnant with their first son, Peter, who was born in November 1969. In May 1972, their second son, Eli, arrived. The marriage to Stephen Craig didn't survive the whirlwind of Hollywood life. By 1975, the two had gone their separate ways, though the reasons stayed behind closed doors. Their son, Peter, later gave a small peek into what life with his parents was like. He remembered knowing early on that his mother wasn't like other moms, and his father, who by then was living on a quasi-commune in Oregon, wasn't like other dads. His childhood, he reflected, was always full of extremes. By the late 90s, Peter had carved his own unconventional path as a novelist, married a poet, and was using his unusual upbringing as material, crediting his dramatic parents for shaping the way he told stories. By the 1970s, Field had undergone a striking transformation. No longer just the girl next door from Gidget, but a woman whose confidence and talent caught the eyes of Hollywood's most eligible men. One of the more surprising connections from this period came to light decades later, when she revealed that she had almost dated Steven Spielberg. Presenting him with the Vanguard Award at the Palm Springs Film Awards in January 2023, she shared that her business manager had tried to set them up. He had arranged a supposed meeting at Universal Studios, convinced they would hit it off. They never actually went on a date, but Spielberg, she revealed, had never left her life. Their bond endured through the years, eventually bringing them together professionally on his 2012 film Lincoln, where Field played Mary Todd Lincoln opposite Daniel Day-Lewis. Spielberg's admiration for her ran deep. In 2022, he told Variety that she had dared Hollywood to typecast her and then shattered every barrier in her way, securing great roles on her own terms. He praised her taste, persistence, and ability to stand the test of time, calling her place in film history singular. In 1982, fresh off filming Kiss Me Goodbye, Field began seeing Kevin Kline, Hollywood's rising star fresh from working with Meryl Streep on Sophie's Choice. They seemed like a promising match, but the romance fizzled quickly. They only went out a few times, later reuniting on screen in the 1991 comedy Soap Dish, where they played ex-lovers. By 1984, Field's outlook on relationships had shifted. She told people she no longer wanted to live by anyone's rules but her own, and she had learned to speak her mind even if it meant telling a man that a joke wasn't funny. Whether that new resolve came from her brief time with Kline or from her famously complicated relationship with Burt Reynolds, it was clear she was no longer interested in playing second fiddle. Her dating life in the 80s also brought her into the orbit of Johnny Carson. But when the spark wasn't there, Field didn't know how to simply walk away. On Watch What Happens Live in 2019, she confessed that she had never been good at saying no. To escape, she resorted to extreme measures. She told Carson that she was having a breakdown and being sent away, all because she couldn't find the words to admit she just wasn't interested. After Carson, Field's focus shifted back to work. Her role as Edna Spaulding in Places in the Heart became a turning point. She later shared with People that playing Edna transformed how she saw herself. For 4 years prior, she had been telling herself she didn't want or need anybody, chanting it like a mantra. But Edna cracked her open. She realized that people were meant to need each other, even if she had spent most of her life insisting otherwise. By the time she met film producer Alan Greisman, Field had been divorced for nearly a decade, and her relationship with Burt Reynolds was behind her. Their first meeting in a restaurant didn't ignite instant romance, but it took 1.5 years before they started dating. Once they did, things moved fast. Less than a year later, they were married. And in 1987, they welcomed their only child together, Sam. He would go on to be one of the greatest constants in her life, remaining exceptionally close to his mother. But cracks in the marriage began to show. In a 1996 interview with People, Field revealed that Greisman thrived on being out, socializing, and going to parties while she found the very idea anxiety-inducing. The joy, she said, had gone out of Mudville, and instead of cherishing what they valued in each other, they began focusing on the negatives. She reached a point where she couldn't ignore the tension in their home and admitted to him that the situation wasn't healthy for them or their son. The couple divorced in 1994 but kept their focus on raising Sam. Spielberg's wife, Kate Capshaw, even remarked that they had such a nice divorce and were great co-parents. After her second marriage ended, Field grew more private about her love life. In 1995, she arrived at the premiere of Waterworld with a new date, Jerry Knight, a gaffer and electrician in the film industry. The two were photographed smiling and holding hands on the red carpet, and Knight accompanied her to the 47th Emmy Awards later that year. But whatever romance they shared faded quietly. There were no messy headlines or bitter splits, just a discreet end to their relationship. In the years that followed, Field's name stopped appearing in the gossip columns alongside a new man's. She wasn't spotted at candlelit dinners or glamorous parties with Hollywood's elite. Instead, she was raising her youngest son, working steadily in film and television, and living life on her own terms. Nearly 3 decades have passed since her last serious relationship, and she seems perfectly at peace with that choice. But peace didn't come without lessons, and one relationship in particular taught her more than she ever expected. It wasn't just a love affair. It was a collision, equal parts exhilarating and exhausting, the kind of connection that could make you feel invincible one moment and invisible the next. Sally Field's explosive relationship with Burt Reynolds. By the time Sally Field met Burt Reynolds in 1977, she'd already been burnt by love twice. But career-wise, she was catching fire. That year, she slipped into the role of Carrie in Smokey and the Bandit, a part that would vault her from TV darling to bona fide movie star, earn her a Golden Globe nomination, and introduce her to the man who would become both her most magnetic and most maddening romance. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable. The quick banter, the sly glances, the kind of heat you can't fake no matter how good an actor you are. Off camera, it was even more intense in those first heady months. But a passion that intense rarely stays in the safe zone. Sooner or later, sparks either keep you warm or leave you burnt. Sadly, the sparks burnt Sally. The first scorch marks appeared when Norma Rae came along. It was 1979, and Sally was riding the kind of career high most actors only dream about. The role as Norma Rae was transformative. It showed fans the gritty, defiant, and less bubbly girl-next-door image of Sally. Hollywood finally saw her range. And soon, the film drew serious awards chatter, and she was invited to the Cannes Film Festival to help push it toward the finish line. She imagined Burt by her side, supporting her and sharing the spotlight together. But Burt, he didn't want to go. It wasn't just disappointment that Sally felt, it was the shock of realizing your partner isn't in your corner the way you thought. And as the Oscar buzz grew louder, his distance became impossible to ignore. One day, he tossed out a line, half joke, half cut, asking if she really thought she was going to win anything. The kind of remark that looks harmless on paper but feels like a bruise when it lands. When the 1980 Oscars rolled around, he flat out refused to be her date. That left her scrambling. No plan, no partner. just the most important night of her career looming. Actor David Steinberg and his wife Judy came to the rescue, sweeping her into a limousine, pouring champagne and making the evening a celebration instead of a lonely climb. Hours later, she was holding the Oscar for Best Actress, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. Burt wasn't there to see it. The relationship limped along for another couple of years, but deep down, that moment had been the truth-teller. It was the quiet realization that she needed a partner who wouldn't flinch at her success, who could stand beside her without feeling overshadowed. And by 1982, they were done. Still, their story didn't exactly end there. Even after her second Oscar win in 1985 for Places in the Heart, the press loved to pick at the threads of their romance, the dizzy highs, the public smiles, the behind-closed-doors drama. It had all the makings of a Hollywood legend: attraction, conflict, and an ending that felt unfinished. Burt went on to marry Lonnie Anderson in 1988, a marriage that would implode 6 years later. Sally stayed single. Years later, Burt would call her the love of his life. She didn't quite return the sentiment. When he died in 2018 at 82, she called their time together indelible, admitting those years had stayed alive in her mind even after 4 decades. But in her memoir in pieces, released just days after his death, she finally told the version of the story she'd been carrying for years. Sure, Burt had been important to her, yes, but for a short, complicated stretch. They hadn't spoken in the last 30 years of his life. She described how his fame had hardened into control, how he used it to steer everyone around him, including her. In her words, they were a perfect match of flaws. She had fallen into him blindly, as though she'd made some soul-deep promise to him long before they'd met. The connection was immediate, intense, and threaded through with disapproval, distance, and an undercurrent of hurt that never really left. Looking back, she was quietly grateful he hadn't been alive to read the book, not because she wanted to erase their history, but because she knew her truth would wound him, and she didn't want that to be her final gift. And in classic Sally Field fashion, she could lace even the most complicated history with humor. On Watch What Happens Live in 2022, when asked to rank her on-screen kisses, Sally didn't hesitate as she mentioned that Burt was a terrible kisser. And her verdict for him being a terrible kisser was because there was too much drooling involved. It's easy to romanticize them. Two impossibly good-looking stars, peak 70s glamour, and the runaway success of Smokey and the Bandit. But behind the glossy photos was a woman learning the hard way that lasting love can't be built with someone who sees your light as a threat. Sally Field never remarried after Burt, not because she stopped believing in love, but because she started believing in herself more. The girl who might have bent herself to fit someone else's comfort was long gone. In her place stood a woman who had learnt and earned the right to choose her own happiness, even if that meant choosing herself. And that's exactly why, decades later, she can say with complete clarity that marriage is off the table. The real reason why Sally Field will never get married again. Sally Field has been married twice, but she's long made peace with the fact that she'll never walk down the aisle again, and she's not romanticizing the idea. Speaking on Julia Louis-Dreyfus's podcast Wiser Than Me, the Forrest Gump star said she simply couldn't picture herself getting married for a third time. She even laughed at the thought, musing that it would only happen if she met someone she actually wanted to spend more than a handful of minutes with. And that, she admitted, had never really been her skill set. It wasn't that she had a grudge against men, she explained, but rather that she'd never been particularly good at choosing the right ones for herself. The patterns were familiar, a spark at the start, the shine fading, and then the realization they weren't the right fit. She remembered how more than one partner had complained that she didn't treat them with the same tenderness and patience she showed her sons. In her mind, the answer was obvious. The men weren't her children, and she didn't believe adult romantic love should be confused with the protective, unconditional kind you give your kids. Looking back, she could see the thread running through her choices. She had never been with someone who could love her without also trying to mold her, someone who could handle her full self without feeling diminished by it. Too many seemed to want her to be less, so they didn't feel the pressure to be more. And for Field, that shrinking act was no longer negotiable. Her first marriage, to high school sweetheart Stephen Craig, ended after 7 years and 2 children. Her second, to producer Alan Greisman, lasted nearly a decade and brought her a third son before they divorced in 1994. Between them was her most famous romance, the stormy stop-and-start relationship with Burt Reynolds. Reynolds liked to call her the love of his life, but for Field, the reality was more complicated. At the height of her career in 1980, when she was nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars for Norma Rae, Reynolds showed little excitement. She remembered him telling her he wouldn't be attending the ceremony with her, a choice that hurt even more when she not only won the Oscar, but also took home the top acting prize at Cannes. Reflecting on it now, she says he simply wasn't kind to her in that moment, a detail that stayed with her long after the applause faded. It was the kind of turning point that, while small on the surface, changes how you see the people closest to you. And for Sally Field, it clarified something. Love without support is just another kind of loneliness. What do you think about Sally Field's decision to not get married again? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.